Every story has a moment when everything stands still, and life is never the same again. Let me tell you a story today, a tale that still gives me goosebumps whenever it crosses my mind. The small town of Guilford, New York, is the kind of place where everyone knows your name. A quiet hamlet of just 1,200 souls. It was a rural community of salt-of-the-earth people, but as any resident will tell you, even the smallest towns hold their secrets. This is the story of one of those secrets. A story that began on a cold, late night with a terrible accident, and the even more terrible truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of a frozen lake. This is the story of Patricia Wlasuik. Patty was a very caring and loving person. She was a good mom, devoted to her 3 children. She worked as a nurse in the emergency room of the local hospital, a job she loved because it allowed her to care for people. But Patty's life had not been an easy one. As a young woman, she faced tremendous stress and first turned to alcohol. Her struggle was long and hard, but she had fought her way to sobriety, becoming a full-time student and a nurse's aide. She had turned her life around. She was married to Patricia Wlasuik. Together, they ran a local bar. From the outside, they seemed normal, but those who knew them well knew a different story. People had seen her with bruises. The marriage was violent. Patty confided in her diaries, writing down her fears. In one entry, she wrote something that would later chill investigators. "At times, I fear Pete will kill me one of these days." There was another layer to the turmoil. Their babysitter, Joyce, was a friend to both. In a desperate attempt to please her husband, Patty had begun a 3-way relationship. But it quickly shifted until it was just Peter and Joyce. Patty was left out, isolated and afraid. She confided she was terrified. Peter had always said she would never leave him, because if she did, he'd find her and kill her. On the night of November 29, 2001, Patty finished her shift at the hospital. The plan was for Peter to have picked up their children. But when Patty got home, she discovered he had forgotten. This led to an argument. They were fighting. The reason, Peter would later say, was because she had been drinking. What happened next was a story that would change multiple times. Peter's initial account was that they got into their truck to get the children. He said Patty was driving. He claimed a deer suddenly appeared. She swerved, the truck slid sideways, went over a bank, and plunged into the frigid waters of Guilford Lake. Peter described a harrowing scene. He said he grabbed Patty's jacket, trying to pull her out, when a swishing sound sucked them both under. He couldn't hold on. He fought his way to the surface, screamed her name, and dove back down. But the cold was too much. He finally got out, ran to a nearby cabin, and frantically explained that his wife was still in the lake. The couple in the cabin called for help. Soon, police and fire crews arrived. Patricia Wlasuik was hysterical. A police diver entered the black, freezing water. He found Patty, not trapped inside, but outside the vehicle, 10 feet behind the truck. She was brought to the surface, and EMTs began immediate CPR, continuing all the way to the hospital. There was a flicker of hope. This was a cold water drowning, and people can sometimes survive submerged for a long time. It was the same hospital where Patty worked. Her friends and colleagues did everything they could. But after an hour of effort, Patricia Wlasuik was pronounced dead. The town was in mourning. A beloved mother and nurse, taken in a tragic accident. But for the investigators, small nagging details began to add up, creating a picture that didn't quite fit. Detective James Cobb arrived on the scene. His first task was to interview Patricia Wlasuik. Peter told his story of the deer and the plunge into the lake. But almost immediately, Cobb noticed problems. A fireman said Peter had first claimed he was driving. When confronted, Peter admitted he had lied to cover for Patty because of her past struggles with alcohol. This change raised a serious question. If Patty had been drinking, why would Peter ever let her drive? Cobb began his physical investigation. The entire side of the lake where the truck went in is protected by guardrails or houses. The one opening the truck found was the only one that allowed access to the water. It seemed highly unusual to have an accident precisely there. Then Cobb looked at the tire marks. They indicated the truck had been moving at about 30 miles per hour, not the 50 to 55 Peter had claimed. At that higher speed, there would have been skid marks. Cobb saw none. The grass wasn't torn up. It looked like a controlled turn. Inside the truck, there was no evidence of a violent crash. No broken steering wheel, no cracked windshield. The interior was virtually undamaged. Other witnesses offered observations that deepened the suspicion. The woman from the cabin noted that when Peter came to their door, his hair was perfectly dry. He wasn't shivering uncontrollably as someone submerged in freezing water would be. At the hospital, nurses thought he acted strangely, more concerned that nobody was paying attention to him. A doctor noted his body temperature was nearly normal, showing no signs of severe hypothermia. The medical examination of Patty was conducted by Dr. James Terzian. His initial findings seemed consistent with an accident. She had abrasions and bruises. Her blood alcohol level was below the legal limit. He noted a small amount of bleeding under her breastbone, which he initially thought was from CPR. He also found something odd. Plant material. Little spiny burrs called burdocks, all over Patty's clothing and in her hair. He mentioned it to investigators. The official report said accident, but Detective Cobb and District Attorney Joseph McBride felt a deep unease. The story didn't add up. They began to treat Patty's passing not as a tragedy, but as a crime. They reached out for information about the Wlasuik's relationship. The stories were chilling. A hunter came forward to say he had seen Peter scream, "I'm going to kill you!" and then punch Patty in the face. Co-workers confirmed they had often seen bruises on her. Then they learned about the diaries. With a warrant, they found them, page after page in Patty's own hand, documented the abuse and her fear. Her words were a voice speaking out from the grave. The pieces pointed to a staged event. Everything that happened to Patty had happened away from that lake. The investigation turned back to Dr. Terzian. The police asked him to re-examine the evidence. He looked again at the bleeding under the breastbone. It was more consistent with a traumatic force to the chest that happened while her heart was still beating. He then looked more carefully for signs of strangulation. He found none. This wasn't that. The injury to her lip, the bleeding inside her mouth. It all pointed to something being held firmly over her nose and mouth. She had been smothered, asphyxiated. It would have taken a minute or two of sheer terror for Patty. Dr. Terzian was now certain. Patty Wlasuik did not drown. She was deceased before that truck ever entered the water. This brought the investigation back to the burdocks. If they didn't come from the lake, where did they come from? Investigators obtained a second warrant to search the Wlasuik property. They found burdock plants all over the backyard. And there, they found one plant that looked trampled, with burrs torn from its stems. And caught in those spiny branches were hairs matched to Patty Wlasuik. This was the crime scene. The backyard. This was where Peter had attacked her, where he had brought her to the ground. This was where she had spent her last terrifying moments. The burdocks had clung to her as she fought for her life. The motive became clear. Peter's bar was struggling. He had significant debt, and he had taken out multiple insurance policies on Patty's life. With her gone, his debts would be paid, and he could be with Joyce. It was a cold, calculated decision. The district attorney had built his case. Peter Wlasuik was arrested for murder. He continued to deny everything. At trial, his story changed again. Now he claimed Patty had intentionally driven into the lake, but the jury didn't believe him. Detective Cobb presented his accident reconstruction. Dr. Terzian explained the science of asphyxiation. Patty's diaries were read aloud, her own words painting a picture of a woman living in fear. The picture for the jury was complete. Peter had ended her days by suffocation, and then tried to cover it up. He had placed her body in the truck, driven to the lake, and guided the vehicle into the water. He then played the role of the distraught husband. The jury found Peter Wlasuik guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. For the family, it was a relief, a moment of justice, but it was not a celebration. Patty was still gone. Her sister Wendy said, "I remember saying he did it. That son of a gun did it. He killed my sister. Justice was done." That's good, but it's a sad situation. It's a tragic thing. The case was a powerful reminder that every life has a story. For the detectives and the doctor, it was a lesson in persistence. Truth was found in the smallest details. A dry hair, a tiny burr, a few words in a diary. It proved that even in the darkest of crimes, a voice can still be heard, speaking out for justice, ensuring that a loving mother and nurse named Patty Wlasuik is remembered for the life she lived.